She left 4 wedding rings and a locked box of rubies in 1880. That is all that remains of her life, at least what can be traced with certainty. The rest of her story lingers as whispers in parish ledgers, yellowed newspaper clippings, and the hushed retellings of those who claim to have seen her ghost pacing the orchard of Ashcombe Manor. Tonight, as you listen, lean into the shadows of history and allow them to speak. But before we begin, subscribe to Silent Heirs, your lantern through the dim corridors of unsolved mysteries, paranormal encounters, and cryptid sightings. Ashcombe Manor stood proud on the rolling hills of Kent, a sprawling brick estate with ivy clinging to its sides like veins feeding the house itself. Built in the late 1700s, it had passed through 3 generations of the Llewellyn family, a dynasty of bankers whose fortunes waxed and waned with Britain's empire. In 1880, the manor's mistress was Eleanor Llewellyn, a woman remembered as strikingly beautiful, though her portraits reveal more severity than softness. Her eyes seemed to avoid the viewer, as if locked on something just beyond the canvas. She had married young, and the match was whispered to be more financial than romantic. Yet what confounded neighbors and clergy alike was not her cold demeanor, nor the lack of children in her marriage, but the discovery, after her disappearance, that she had worn at different times for wedding bands. None identical. None connected to her known husband. The first record comes from the village jeweler, who claimed Eleanor would visit discreetly, always veiled, always alone, and purchase a ring without offering explanation. 1 in gold, 1 in platinum, 1 set with a small sapphire, and 1 unusually plain, almost crude. She would wear each for a time, then exchange it for another, never stacking them, never discarding them. Each ring, he said, was kept pristine, as if she treasured them equally. The parish priest noted, in his diary, a troubling confession she had once made. The entry reads only, "Lady of Ashcombe believes herself bound fourfold, though no annulment nor widowhood justifies it." Disturbing. He never elaborated, but when his papers were read after his death, the entry was marked with a small cross in the margin, a symbol he used when he felt something verged into the supernatural. The mystery of the rings became more sinister in June of 1880. Eleanor was last seen hosting a midsummer gathering at Ashcombe Manor. Guests remembered her speaking of travel, of wanting to see Constantinople, and some recalled her appearing almost giddy, uncharacteristically light. By dawn she was gone. No servant saw her depart, no carriage was summoned. Her bed remained unslept in. Only her maid claimed she had been humming, faintly, long after midnight, a tune the maid did not recognize but described as like a hymn, though in no tongue of the church. The search revealed nothing. The Thames was dragged, her husband interrogated, the staff divided and dismissed. Weeks later, while clearing her private dressing room, they found the rings. 4 of them, laid neatly in a line upon the vanity table. And beside them, a small locked box made of oak and iron, impossible to open without shattering it. Its contents would not be revealed for nearly half a century, and even then only partially. But in 1880, her disappearance became the obsession of Kent. Rumors grew that she had been seen walking in the orchards, pale and barefoot, long after she had supposedly vanished. A gardener's boy swore he glimpsed her reflection in the pond, even as the surface remained calm. Others spoke of hearing the sound of glass shattering at night, though nothing was ever broken. Then there was the matter of the manor itself. Guests who returned described a heaviness within its halls, as though air itself had grown viscous. Letters from neighbors tell of hearing bells tolling at odd hours, though the church denied ever ringing them. Some began to whisper that Ashcombe Manor had always been touched by something darker, its foundations built upon land where plague victims were once interred hastily, in shallow graves. Still, the most enduring legend remains tied to Eleanor herself. Why the 4 rings and why the locked box of rubies? Theories range from secret marriages, to occult practices, to an inheritance of cursed gems. Yet the simplest truth, that no one ever saw her alive again, remains the most haunting. If Eleanor had merely fled, why leave behind the symbols of whatever vows she had bound herself to? And why ensure they were discovered so deliberately, as if laid out for someone's eyes? Some suggest she meant to communicate through arrangement, a code of loyalty or betrayal. Others believe she left them behind to break a pact, that her vanishings were the consequence of failing it. The years did nothing to quell the unease. Strange fires broke out in the orchard, consuming whole rows of apple trees though no storm had struck. Visitors described hearing weeping from behind the locked door of her chamber, though the room was empty. Ashcombe Manor's reputation shifted from noble estate to a place avoided by the superstitious. And yet the manor remained in use. Her husband remarried, though locals said his new bride refused to sleep in Eleanor's room. The box of rubies was kept hidden away, sealed, and whispered about as a family burden. The story might have ended there, with a vanished woman, for inexplicable rings, and a box forever closed. But time has a way of eroding secrecy. By 1925, a descendant of the Llewellyns would attempt to pry into what his ancestors had tried to bury. And with that, the legend of Eleanor deepened into something more sinister than even the villagers of Kent had feared. By 1925 the orchard at Ashcombe had gone sullen, limbs leaning inward as if sharing what people would not. The estate had passed to Edward Llewellyn, a quiet veteran. He hired Clara Vale, an archivist whose calm could slow a clock, to sift the house for value and truth. In the dressing room they opened the velvet drawer. For wedding rings lay as Eleanor had left them. Gold, platinum, a narrow band with a midnight sapphire, and a plain iron circle that felt heavier than it looked. Clara tilted each to the window. Inside the bands were marks, neither hallmarks nor dates. The gold carried 4 shallow tallies. The platinum bore a single line ending in a dot. The sapphire showed a tiny etched ripple. The iron had no cut, only a soot-dark bruise as if it had known heat. Not initials, Clara said. Instructions. They found the ledger of T. Greeley, jeweler optician. Under 1879 were 4 sales to a veiled lady using 4 names. The addresses were not houses but places. Stour Bridge at dusk. Medway Lock, above the weir. Confluence near Darent. Head of the Rother, Chalk Spring. For rivers of Kent, stitched through her trail. Across the lane the parish diary added its thin help. Beneath the priest's line about Eleanor bound fourfold, a later hand had written, which altar, which church? An elderly verger gave the old answer. Vows taken at thresholds, not in naves, water, stone, hedge, and gate. Country churches with no roofs, he said, older than bells. Here the record blurs into unsolved mystery and documented rumor. Paranormal encounter shading parish note. A shepherd in 1891 wrote that something pale the length of a cart slid across the Ashcombe pond as if the water were glass. A cryptid sighting, a modern pamphlet would call it. The old men just said don't look twice. Clara and Edward mapped the grounds. A low barrow lay under the far orchard. Rook Brook made a cold ford. A hedge gate opened to the Roman road. A fallen standing stone slept in nettles. For thresholds, waiting. The rings began to look less like jewelry and more like keys for locks that had never seen a door. At dusk they tried the gold band at the brook. Clara held it above the current. Without intending to speak, she murmured the first line of a hymn she had not sung since girlhood. The water bunched. The ring grew warm, a small pulse against her finger. Edward closed his hand around her wrist and the warmth withdrew. Borrowed words, Clara said. Not mine. The house returned gestures. A single bell sounded at midnight and then denied itself. Footfalls crossed Eleanor's dressing room while the carpet kept its nap. In the morning Clara found a slip of paper beneath the cotton in the ring case. Eleanor's hand, matched to letters in the family tin. Return what I borrowed or they will collect.
No signature.
Only a blot. They tested the platinum ring against the fallen stone. Moonlight thinned. The line and dot inside the band matched a shallow groove none had noticed. When metal touched stone a pressure moved through their bones. More felt than heard. Like a name carried down a stairwell. Edward stepped back, palms open. We are out of our depth, he said. Paper gave more. A seamstress from Maidstone wrote that Lady Ashcombe insisted on narrow pockets sewn behind the bodice lining. Flat enough to hide folded notes or charms. A bookseller's invoice listed an obscure tract on local rights. In a copied margin Eleanor had underlined, 4 vows for guardianship: water, stone, hedge, gate. Take rubies as pledge. For vows. For rings. A silent pact, not to 4 men but to 4 thresholds that made the manor safe, or held it liable. If Eleanor kept her side, why did she vanish? If she broke it, why lay the rings out like returned badges? The unsolved mystery stretched. On the 3rd night the orchard brightened from within. Apples glowed ember red though no lamp burned. A low hum toward the branches, patient and displeased. Edward woke with blood on his tongue where he had bitten it. Clara, buttoning her gloves, said, "That is a summons, or a warning." At dawn they set the iron band on the hinge of the hedge gate. Frost formed in a perfect ring at their feet, despite the summer air. Beyond the gate the Roman road looked newer, the world neat as a turned page. For a breath they felt that if they stepped through, someone would be waiting. Edward lifted the iron away and the present fell back. They did not test the sapphire. It watched them from the tray, dark and patient. Instead a letter arrived, delayed by the dead letter office. A memorandum drafted by Eleanor in 1880 and never filed. It read like instructions for an executor who would never be named. Do not sell the water rights. Do not move the stone. Do not cut the hedge. Do not widen the gate. When the rubies are awakened, they will want heat, not light. Keep them enchanted by cold. Clara folded the paper and looked at the iron-strapped box that had waited 45 years. She traced one seam and said, in the tone reserved for thresholds, "We need to know what she borrowed." Edward fetched a chisel. In the orchard the hum rose, almost pleased, like a host hearing a long-delayed knock. They worked in the cold pantry, the kind of room that remembers winter even in August. Edward brought ice from the fishmonger in burlap sacks and packed it around the iron-strapped box until his breath made its own little clouds. Clara set the 4 rings on a saucer. Each band rhymed with a faint fringe of frost it had not earned. The orchard's hum lapped at the stone foundation. Patient, a host waiting for latecomers to arrive. The box had no lock to pick, only stubborn metal that wanted to be persuaded. Edward eased the chisel beneath one strap, then another. The iron gave as if it had been designed to yield, not fight. When the lid lifted, the cold reached out. Not air, but a feeling of being led into a church where the nave is shadow and the altar bright as a wound. Inside lay river pebbles arranged like vertebrae, their smooth backs shining with preserved damp. Between them, wrapped in waxed muslin that smelled of camphor and wintergreen, were the rubies. Not all cut, not all stone. Some were lumps, deep red as coagulated sunset. Others held occlusions that looked like commas caught in glass. One, when Clara leaned close, fogged from within, as if a breath had been waiting there for 45 years and chose this moment to exhale. Beneath the first layer of pebbles was a folded square of paper. Eleanor's hand again, thin, firm, in that 19th century discipline which makes every letter a small decision. The box is a pledge, not a treasure. They will want heat, not light. Keep them enchanted by cold. To return a vow, give back what you took where you took it. Use the ring that marked the taking. For tiny drawings followed. A ripple for water, a notch for stone, a sprigging hedge, a hinged gate, and a final line written in slanted haste. If I do not return, do not forgive me. Return for me. They waited until evening when the orchard's glow resumed, each apple nursing its ember as if from a shared wick. At the ford in Rook Brook, they bared the gold band in Clara's palm. The water went glass-flat from bank to bank, the surface suddenly unwilling to move. Under the ice breath, Clara tipped 3 rubies into the current. They neither sank nor floated but seemed to hang in place, caught by a decision the brook itself had not made yet. Then, like parched soil accepting rain, the stream opened and the rubies slipped down, one by one, at a tempo too ceremonious to be natural. The gold ring grew warm, then cooled, as if exhaling. Somewhere upriver a mallard drummed its wings but did not rise. At the fallen stone they pressed 2 rubies into the shallow groove the platinum ring's engraving had foretold. The stone darkened where the red touched it, not stained but fed. The platinum churred, no sound, precisely, more a tremor in the bones that said yes the way a door answers a familiar hand. Edward closed his eyes and, for a second, pictured the Roman road just beyond the hedge in its prime. Men walking toward the coast with sand in their sandals, carrying orders written in a language none here spoke anymore. They stood at the hedge gate, leaves glossy with night. Clara set the iron ring on the hinge and threaded a single ruby onto a hawthorn thorn. Frost drew itself in a perfect circle around her boots. The hedge breathed, a thin intake like the sigh of paper creased and uncreased. Far across the orchard, a fox paused mid-step and looked toward them, ears forward, as if hearing its name called by someone who had held it as a kit. At the Roman gate, nothing at first. The hinge lifted and fell under Edward's hand as though its weight had never been any other. Clara held the sapphire ring against the old iron and felt a small reluctance, a half-inch of the world that had not yet decided to be real. She set the last rubies into the shallow trench at the threshold and, without meaning to, whispered the line of the hymn that had visited her at the brook. The air pressed thin. The orchard's hum climbed into letters she could not keep in her head long enough to repeat. Then all at once the warming stopped. The apples went dark. The night sounded like night again. They waited. Nothing moved that shouldn't. A bat performed its careful math above them. The smell of nettles and chalk rose old and proper. "It's done," Edward said, in a voice that wanted to be believed. Clara nodded, but did not speak. The word finished could too easily be mistaken for an invitation. Back in the pantry the box was changed. The muslin lay flat, patient and clean, as if the rubies had been excused and the cloth relieved. In the place where the paper had been, a second sheet waited thinner, almost translucent, the ink walking toward the far edge even as they read. "Thank you." No signature. The handwriting was not Eleanor's. It had a modern's looseness, a hand that did not practice copybooks or quills. Clara felt absurdly shy under it, as if someone had turned to address her in a room she had thought empty. For 3 nights Ashcombe was ordinary. The orchard shed its ember. The pond reflected only. The manor took back the sound of footfalls and redistributed them to the living. Edward slept and did not wake with copper on his tongue. Clara catalogued the jewelry, sealed the ledger, and returned the rings to their saucer in an order that pleased her. Iron farthest, then platinum, sapphire, and gold. On the 4th afternoon, the jeweler's ledger on the desk had turned a page. No breeze, no open window. Yet the place on which Clara had left her ribbon kept had moved to a new entry. Written in the spare, perfect capitals of a clerk who knows bills can change a life. Sale, ring, plain, iron. Buyer, vale. Delivery, gate at dusk. The date was today. The handwriting was not Greeley's. The shop had been closed 20 years. "I didn't buy anything," Clara said gently, as though argument would confuse the ledger. Edward looked at her hands. When had she put on the iron ring? It sat on the index finger of her right hand, too large for the fit but reluctance keeping it from sliding off. She lifted it as if uncomprehending and tried to pull. It resisted with the politeness of a handshake that does not yet want to end. They walked to the gate together. Evening singled the hedges into coats of shadow.
No ember, no.
The frost circle did not appear. Yet the road beyond had that extraordinary neatness again, as if someone had considered it and decided to keep it. "This is not a taking," Clara said, more to the hedge than to Edward. "This is a return that returns." The woman waiting on the road was not in a portrait, yet Clara knew her. No ring on either hand. Hair pinned high in a style 45 years out of date and therefore immune to fashion. Eleanor Llewellyn regarded them the way one reads a weather vane before stepping into weather that doesn't yet know you. She did not speak. She looked at the iron ring, then at the orchard, then at Clara. Not a command, not a plea. More like a question no one else would understand. Clara touched the ring to the hinge. A sensation like cold water climbed her arm, passed through her shoulder, and settled politely beneath her collarbone, as if taking a seat it had been assigned long ago. Eleanor tilted her head, accepting or acknowledging, then stepped backward across the threshold, not vanishing but rather receding into the road's oldness until she was a smear of attention, and then a correction in the air, and then nothing the eye could prove. In the morning, the parish bell did not toll. A laborer digging in the lower orchard uncovered a small scatter of river pebbles under one tree, damp and very slightly warm in his hand, though the sun had not touched them. He put them back. Weeks later, the verger found Clara in the nave of St. Botolph's, tracing the outlines of the stone threshold with her glove, as if measuring something that could not be weighed. She wore 4 rings now, not stacked, never stacked, one for each finger that would allow it. They seemed lighter on her than they had looked in the tray. When asked, she said only that she had inventory to complete. The ledger shows no sale. The archive shows no appointment. Yet a fisherman on the Medway swore he watched a veiled lady place 3 dark jewels on a flat stone near the loch and leave with empty hands. He did not follow, because a chill ran up his calves and told him he'd gone far enough for one day. There are still reports, the soft-filing kind that never trouble a magistrate. A child who swims early at the Stour says she sees a red bead roll along the riverbed like a ladybird and then drop into silt. A night watchman on the Roman road hears a woman humming and feels a ring of frost collect about his boots, then melt with an odd courtesy. A botanist finds a single thorn on a hawthorn hedge tipped with something that is not berry and not stone and decides he has misremembered it. People file these moments under unsolved mystery, and so they remain. A paranormal encounter here, a near-cryptid sighting there, each instance small enough to slide past certainty, all of them tending toward Ashcombe like iron filings seeking their lodestone. What remains of Eleanor's act is not a curse anyone can point to, nor a confession that puts any hand to a page. It is a pact behaving as pacts do, ending and beginning so closely together that the seam cannot be seen unless you stand exactly on it. She left 4 wedding rings and a locked box of rubies. Someone else returns them, and then someone else, and the orchard continues to bear. If you walk there at dusk, you may think you hear bells the church did not ring. You may think you see a woman waiting at a gate that is only a gap in a hedge. You may be right, or you may only be noticing the place where a vow breathes in and out, holding a house to its ground and asking, very gently, who will keep it this time. And that concludes tonight's descent into the mystery of Ashcombe Manor. For rings, a locked box of rubies, and a vow that refuses to rest. If you felt the chill of Eleanor's story, be sure to subscribe to Silent Heirs, where unsolved mysteries, paranormal encounters, and cryptid sightings linger in the dark, waiting to be told. Until next time, keep your lantern lit, and never ignore what waits at the threshold.